Welcome to CouncilCast, news bites and insights from the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. I'm Rob Boyce, Director of Market Intelligence and Insights here at the Council. I'm joined today by Andrew Robinson, co-CEO of insurance data automation and analytics firm, Groundspeed Analytics. Thanks for joining us today, Andrew.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
All right, Andrew. Well, you come from a background within the insurance industry, but you also offer a unique perspective after working in the insurtech space for several years. Can you talk a little bit first about your insurance background and where in particular you saw opportunity in the commercial insurance sector, specifically opportunities for innovation within the broker space?
Yeah, happy to do it, Rob. So, I spent 20 years in strategy consulting, ultimately running what today is the global insurance practice for PwC. And then I spent 11 years on the corporate side, 10 of them with Hanover Insurance Group. I ran the specialty insurance businesses, was the head of corporate development, so tightly connected to our international activities and a variety of other businesses. Always around sort of the commercial insurance, the global commercial insurance market. And along the way, as I was sort of in the last few years of my time at Hanover, started getting involved in insurtech in a board member, an investor capacity. So kind of saw this really interesting set of events be put into motion before it got a lot of press. And broadly speaking, what really sort of intrigued me was the recognition that there's so much about the insurance industry that looks different than it has in the past. So things like structurally capital, coming from unusual sources, whether it be sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, hedge funds, and the structural change of viewing property and casualty as an asset class, which means that that different forms of capital and quite honestly excess capital are likely structurally part of the commercial insurance market forever. That's one big structural change I saw that creates a lot of really interesting second order changes. The second is that the industry, despite sort of a variety of efforts to drive efficiency and improvements, still operates, with an expense ratio in total in excess of 40% of every premium dollar, which, at sort of any level of assessment, you'd say that isn't sustainable given every other industry that has succumbed to the efficiency and the positive impacts from a customer experience and other dimensions that technology brings. So, it took me 30 years of consulting experience, corporate operating experience, and then getting exposed to technology, and then finally the time arrived where I sort of had enough of a perspective around some of these macro changes where I just believe that technology was going to be a tremendously democratizing aspect of how the commercial insurance industry operates, and that's really what brought me to making the move and fully immersing myself in an operating capacity at Groundspeed. Great,
and yeah. So that being said, moving a little bit more towards Groundspeed's product, and which is clearly focused on the broker, by brokers for brokers, and streamlining some of those inefficiencies across the insurance industry. Can you speak to a little bit more about your product and where, kind of the decision to become involved in Groundspeed specifically?
Yeah, so, the background is that Jeff Mason, the founder of Groundspeed, was a longtime friend. Actually, he was part of a group that had founded a risk retention group focused on the professional liability market. Had a chance to get to know him while I was at Hanover, tried to acquire his company. So when he started Groundspeed, I was eager to help and had been involved all along. My joining Groundspeed formally in an operating capacity coincided with a $30 million Series B investment from a venture capital firm called Oak HCFT, a company that I had been part of leading up to joining. And really Groundspeed, just the concept for the business was just squarely in what was a really important part of the market that really could benefit from what they do. And that's fundamentally around taking the information that's so critical to brokers and carriers and the insureds as well, around loss information and contract and policy information, submission information, exposure information, much of which moves around the industry in unstructured forms and or semi-structured forms. And our view was that attacking that problem with some of the newer technologies, particularly in the areas of artificial intelligence and more specifically in machine learning, and trying to take that unstructured information, put structure to it, was not only something that would have tremendous value to the end customer, but certainly to carriers and to brokers. And we saw if we could attack that problem, the potential economic impact, whether it be in efficiency or better insights, were huge. And so we started on that journey, not knowing where it would take us, and we've been blessed with great success and great clients, and quite honestly, the ability to work on really strategically relevant, strategically important, types of issues, particularly for our broker clients.
Right. So in regards to those clients, what type of insights and information have they gathered that they would not have otherwise been able to have a clear line of sight into? And do you have any particular success stories that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so look, I would describe sort of our impact around sort of four primary things. So one is just we have been able to automate loss reporting, create facilities to do sort of on-demand stewardship reporting, which is really kind of faster, better, cheaper. Today, that's a lot of work that falls to an account manager. And we can take all that data, structure it, and provide sort of the automation around the really important things in terms of maintaining and navigating just sort of client management processes. I think that we've had a great deal of impact around just better understanding ultimate end client metrics, whether it be helping our broker clients understand ultimate loss ratio, because we're able to take the loss runs, structure them, develop them, have a point of view about how to basically look across multiple policy years, multiple carriers, and have that more integrated view. But also just be able to provide better information related to how like companies have their programs structured, whether it be related to limits or sublimits or retentions. That's all information that if you can take sort of policy data, you can structure that, you have this tremendous reference data set that you can utilize for any client. And that's been a sort of a second key output. I think a third for us is really around market intelligence, and if you can understand ultimate loss ratio for an individual client, you can do it pretty much on any basis, right? So you can really understand underwriting profitability on any basis, which, in terms of just better understanding your book of business, so you can identify profit pools to grow your book of business, opportunities to take books of business, convert them into programs, which tends to be an agenda item certainly for the larger of the brokers, monitoring loss development for profit sharing. Those are the kind of things in terms of market intel and driving growth that our clients have benefited from. And I would just tell you that we've got success stories that span each and every one of those points.
Right. So yeah, you mentioned working with some of the larger brokers. Would you say you have a particular target client, and how, if you can share a number or any names, how many brokers are you currently working with?
Yeah. So today, I mean, we're a young company. We're only about 2.5 years old, and we have today roughly about a dozen clients. About 2/3 of those are brokers, 1/3 are carriers. I would describe all those relationships as being large. So our relationships tend to be in the high hundreds of thousands to kind of low millions of dollars. So we're doing a lot of work with a small number of clients. What I'd tell you is that amongst the top 15, is effectively, the sort of, 8 or so broker clients. They're in that top 15 group, and that's principally where our focus has been to this point. But certainly we see plenty of opportunities working broadly with what I would describe, as kind of the BI 250, size brokers.
Absolutely. So moving on to a data question, where does Groundspeed get its data from? Are you working exclusively with legacy agency management systems? And if so, how has your experience been working with them, and have they been receptive to sharing data two ways?
Yeah, so great question. In the broker world, very little of the information that ultimately we work with sits inside the agency management systems. In fact, it's one of the principal issues that we're solving for. So by and large, what our clients are providing to us, whether it be loss runs from the carriers, exposure schedules from their clients, whether it be policies that they basically have PDFs of and they're storing in some electronic file. Generally speaking, we're receiving that raw data. So that comes in the form of PDFs or Excel documents, image documents, zip files, emails. You go through the list. And that information is arriving to us in a variety of ways, whatever the data transfer mechanism that our broker clients prefer, whether it be APIs or just a secure file transfer. But that's the data that we're working with, and then when we're producing on the other end is structured output, so quite discrete information that's been extracted from these documents, and ultimately that ends up in a variety of places with our clients. Some use that purely in an operational flow, and so it supports single client situations. Others are feeding data warehouses. Others are seeking to place some of that data into their agency management system. So it is really it's very specific to the client situation as to ultimately how they consume what we produce.
Great, and I'm correct that that's all done automatically just through your machine learning algorithms that you were talking about?
Exactly. And I think one thing that's important here is that because we are working with data that broadly is everything that's in the underwriting domain, right? So you're talking about submissions and policies, contract information, exposures being the second category, and loss information being the third. Much of what we're doing is really taking that information, not only structuring it, but our clients are increasingly asking us for things that are attributes of risk, that predict attributes of risk. And again, because we're working with kind of this golden triangle of information, exposures, policy information, and loss information, the power of what we can actually produce from a predictions perspective is really quite awesome.
Absolutely. So what about the consumer journey, the insured? Clearly, the client experience, or I guess lack thereof, has driven much innovation in the commercial insurance sector. A lot of different companies attempting to solve different issues. Does Groundspeed's underlying technology affect the consumer in any way, shape, or form?
That's a great question. I think that, in principle terms, I think that what we have done so far, so in our 2.5-year journey, we really are about dramatically improving sort of the processes that are in place today. So, if you are a large risk, a client of a larger broker, the ability for you to have meetings with your broker on a quarterly basis where the broker is fully prepared in terms of being able really to understand loss activity and how losses have developed period over period, to be able to do that with more insight and more precision as to cause of loss or type of loss or what have you. That's a very powerful thing, particularly if we can deliver that, at very little, sort of real cost to the broker, which we do. I do think that we're enabling the broker's clients to have more information to make better decisions. So to the extent that we're empowering the broker to have internal benchmarking on program structures or coverages or attachment points or what have you, that's based on, like pools of clients, that's very powerful. I think over time, there's much more that what we're doing will enable sort of new services, new capabilities. But I think much of what we're doing today is, dramatically improving the processes that are already in place.
Right. Okay. So moving to a more industry level question, if you will, the conversation around InsurTech has changed dramatically over the past 2 or 3 years or so, from disruption being a key buzzword in 2016, moving to more collaboration and ultimately partnerships in 2018. What are your thoughts on this current dialogue around InsurTech from both an insurance and InsurTech professional? And would you agree that this conversation has changed dramatically?
Oh my God! Well, look, I started with the view that this is all about enabling both incumbents and kind of the new breed of risk takers. I believe there will be some small slice of disruption. There has been over the last couple of years been outsized media press attention to more of the disruptive and kind of these full stack new insurers. But I believe that wholeheartedly that the capabilities and the history and strength of the incumbents is a real sign of something that can only get better if you bring to them the right kind of solutions. And I started with that, and I'm excited to be part of really enabling and partnering with both insurers and brokers as opposed to this notion of disruption. I think that we'll look back at 5 years and we'll say, yeah, certainly there's been changes and there's been, new entrants who have seized some portion of the markets in very specific categories. But I'm certainly of the view that all this opportunity that's in front of us is there for the incumbents to harness and likely not to be nearly as disruptive as the press has sort of created in their headlines here over the course of the last couple of years, and I've been in that position. I've held that view since my involvement, 4, 5, 6 years ago when I started to work with the first sort of breed of newer insurtechs that were out there.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely something that we can both agree on here at the council. And I think some of these, as you mentioned, early stage insurtechs, when they got in the industry, they began to realize this is a much more complicated industry than they initially thought, especially when you get to the mid and large market commercial space. There's a lot going on out there, and the whole regulation aspect is something that I believe a lot of these companies didn't even take into consideration. But on a similar note,
by the way, Rob, I'd say one thing on that, which is, I think the further you get into sort of the more complex, more specialized world of commercial insurance, one of the things that we believe wholeheartly, and our experience has been reinforced by our clients, is that we're led by insurance guys, right? My co-CEO Jeff Mason is a longstanding insurance person. Our chief operating officer, longstanding insurance person. Our head of delivery is a longstanding insurance person. Our head of sales, had a similar role at Aon Solutions, Ventive. The reality is that our technology guys are all from kind of the next generation, right? Who are bringing really the innovation. But our experience is to understand these problems, to solve these problems. You have to be long in the tooth in insurance. You really have to have insurance chops. And I think that one of the key sort of defining attributes for why we've been so successful so early is because we have so much insurance in our DNA, which by the way, our clients tell us is one of the most distinctive attributes that we bring, as a newer insurtech company. And so I believe it's not only relevant in terms of, the sort of notion of partnership and enablement, but I think it's just an important attribute for many insurtechs to have, particularly if they're going to operate in the commercial and the more complex end of commercial insurance.
Yeah, certainly a unique attribute to have and very important. And on a similar note, you spoke at the council's Insurance Leadership Forum, ILF, in early October, and then went to go speak at this year's InsurTech Connect conference in Vegas directly after, which the council also attended along with about 6,000 other professionals. Can you speak to your experience at ITC? You mentioned that you've been going for all 3 years, and how's your experience changed and through the lens of as an InsurTech executive?
Yeah, so what's nice is I had attended ILF for 10 years, so you develop these very senior relationships that stay with you, as you move into other things. And so what I found, interestingly enough, is that as ITC, InsurTech Connect, has grown to now 6,000 people, there were a very, very large number of senior executives there. And in my third year there, it's only been in existence for 3 years. We did things that allowed us to sort of stay out of all the fray of activity and get focused on what clearly was a more senior audience that was attending, get really high quality time, with them. And of course, it's a different kind of conversation, right? When you're in that environment, you are talking about, things that are more innovative in nature and so forth. And so I found this year it was a wildly productive meeting, and I was astonished by, the number of very senior level, C-level executives that we were able to have substantially dedicated time with. And because of the environment, we were able to have different kinds of conversations, ones that were much more focused on, more things that are happening structurally in the marketplace, things that are happening with technology and what's on their agenda, and then ultimately, what's the opportunity for us to be working with them. And I didn't see that in the first 2 years. This was a sort of a very different year for us in terms of that experience.
Yeah, we'd certainly agree with you on that one. And I'd like to end on a high-level question. From a broker, from someone who's been on the carrier side and also has, started working for an InsurTech for the past 2.5 years, what would be your advice to council members and broker executives on sorting out through all the noise that is InsurTech and how to best evaluate not only what's out there, but specifically what they need inside their own firms?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure there's a single answer to this. What I would say is that there's a lot of hype out there, and the examples will tend to either be, in the individual consumer or personal line segment, or even in the small commercial segment. But even in the small commercial segment, you have companies out there who have announced that they're going to sort of change the nature of the industry, whether it be in terms of digital distribution or what have you. Yet what you see is them picking off very, very niche segments of the marketplace. I do think that there's a lot to learn from those stories. So I find those interesting in that, there are things that can be taken away, and so they're worth paying attention to. So when Lemonade says, hey, listen, we can settle a claim effectively in a parametric decision, right? Being able to just a binary decision, pay or not pay, and do it through a chatbot. Even though that's only being done for 25% of their claims, and even though the average paid is $1,200, just the fact that there's an entity out there doing that is very intriguing, and to think about that. I pay attention to those things because they really stretch your imagination as to what's possible. It's not about the business in totality. It's about some of the practices of those businesses that I find really interesting. That said, look, I think that this is a journey, and it's important to be engaged in what's happening in these things. Experiment somewhat, but pick a handful of things that really can move the needle in your business. I think it's one of the reasons Groundspeed's been successful. We're doing really interesting stuff with artificial intelligence, but we're doing it around problems that either have been solved manually or have been there but have not been solved because the cost to solve them is just too much. And I would say finding, those kinds of things that are available now, starting to experiment, and then, obviously adopting the stuff that's really ready now is part of the journey. Keeping your eye on those examples like, the Lemonade chatbot example, because knowing that sort of stuff, being aware of that, being engaged around that stuff will pay off dividends in the future, even if, sort of the commercial viability of some of those things to maybe the commercial insurance market isn't today, it's at some point in the future. And I think that's my sort of summary advice as to how it is that I would say to think about what's happening in the marketplace today.
Great. Well, we appreciate your insights. And Andrew, thanks so much for your time here today. Really appreciate it. And on behalf of the council, we're very excited to see what's in store for Groundspeed Analytics. We think you guys are doing some great, innovative things. Again, this is Rob Boyce with the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. And thank you for tuning into CouncilCast. Take care and talk soon.